Welcome back, everybody. You're watching clips from the Shaun Harrison case here on the Law and Crime Network. That kid just got drilled. The victim knocked into a bathroom, apparently. The fight continued in there. And you've got this witness on the stand saying, hey, look, the defendant, Shaun Harrison, sort of spurred this thing on and asked us to continue the fight. Is it evidence that Shaun Harrison had something out against Luis Rodriguez, the victim who was eventually shot in the head, purportedly by the defendant, Shaun Harrison? So, look, a lot of accusations flying around in this case. Here to help us break them down is the dean of former prosecutors, current criminal defense attorneys, Law and Crime guest host, and the dean of human beings in general, Bob Bianchi. Bob, it's been too long since we've sat across this table from one another together.
Great to be here with you, Aaron.
So what do you think? I mean, this is really good evidence, and it's interesting to watch. I mean, I feel bad for the victim. He got almost knocked cold there in school. Certainly not the behavior that deans of human beings like yourself would want to encourage to happen. But if the accusations are true here, then it sounds like this school administrator really kind of had it out for this guy, and therefore there would be some evidence that, okay, well, if he's asking another student to take out Luis Rodriguez, then maybe if the student wasn't successful, then he would take matters into his own hands and do something to him himself.
Right. We'll see if the prosecutor's going to tie in here that there was some dispute going on. We know that there were drugs missing, things of this nature, and this was the first shot across the bow. Knock him into the bathroom, have one of his other guys beat him up. That didn't work. Whatever was the problem was not remediated, which the prosecutor, I'm sure, is going to argue led ultimately to the shooting down the road. I
mean, talk about some incredible accusations here, though. You've got this guy, Shaun Harrison, who's a preacher of sorts, who's a school administrator, and he's out there spreading the good word of no guns, no gangs, no violence. People shouldn't be packing heat in schools. They shouldn't be dealing drugs. And then under the surface, the accusation, at least from the prosecutor and from a number of these witnesses, like the one that we just heard from, they're saying he was involved in all of the above.
Yeah, now it comes down to credibility, right? So ultimately, what are the motivations? These kids aren't necessarily squeaky clean, but jurors can certainly look at people. I've put witnesses on the stand as a prosecutor, really bad and sordid backgrounds, and the jury just believed them. I think the thing that hurts him the most, if I were the prosecutors, tying in when they went into the quote-unquote reverend's home, they found large quantities, bags of marijuana, and other things that would be consistent, that would support the theme of what these juveniles are saying.
We're thinking exactly along the same lines, because I made similar comments yesterday and then earlier today. Look, I mean, when you've got testimony from witnesses, people might say, okay, you know, these guys are involved in this. Are they just trying to, you know, rat out an administrator to cover their own butts? But then when they raid the home and they find the items match up with what the witnesses are saying, and they basically corroborate one another. Well, let's continue listening to some of the testimony of Kevin Perez, the student here. We'll be back with more analysis in a bit. Again, this is the Shaun Harrison case out of Boston. This case has been on a lunch break for about an hour. We're expecting live testimony to resume any minute. In the meantime, more testimony from Kevin Perez. More testimony from Kevin Perez, a student who was under the charge of this school administrator, Shaun Harrison, who's facing basically the Massachusetts analogy to attempted murder charges. He's accused of shooting another student, Luis Rodriguez, in the head. Bob Bianchi, some critical testimony coming out of that witness, that student, Kevin Perez, there, basically saying, hey, look, Shaun Harrison, the administrator, the defendant, talked about shooting the victim here, talked about marijuana dealing, and he had this 12-inch or so long knife in his office. Now, one of the officers who searched the office couldn't find the knife. That doesn't mean it necessarily wasn't there at some point. It could mean that he just took it home. And some of the cross-examination of some of these witnesses kind of gets into these points, but they don't really make a clear factual point. You know, just because my pen is on the table right now and you see it doesn't mean that if somebody else comes in here, my pen is still going to be on the table.
Right, right. You saw, I mean, of course, as a defense lawyer, you want to be able to take any information that they're testifying to in court and contradict it with something that is not there when the police get there. It certainly is a tactic, but like you point out, Aaron, and I agree with you completely, is it a meaningless thing? Is it something that's easily explainable? What I think the defense needs to do here is show what motivation, even though the defendant doesn't have to prove a thing, the defense, what motivation do these kids have to lie? And I want to fill this out, can you explain to us, to the jury's satisfaction, why the police found guns, ammunition, large bags of marijuana, and possible gang tattoo, Aaron, that's in the writings that are out there, that he may have on him. These are going to be all things, if in fact that's true, that are going to be bad, and the defense is going to have a hard time explaining.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at this saying, okay, look, and I go back to saying this yet again. I mean, when you have witnesses on the stand, even if they've got credibility issues, if the police then take what the witnesses say and go find evidence, tangible items that relate to what the witnesses have said, then chances are they might be telling the truth. Might be telling the truth beyond a reasonable doubt. I mean, this is not uncommon for people who were involved in some sort of alleged criminal activity to then sort of come clean and tell the police, okay, yeah, this is what was going on. I was involved in this part of it, but this guy, he was the ringleader. He was the one that was really doing it.
Yeah, listen, I've done a number of gang prosecutions, for example, in murder cases and in racketeering cases, and many of those cases you have to put not necessarily the most pristine citizens on the witness stand. They were part of the organized criminal activity. So the question becomes, as a prosecutor, how credible are they in and of themselves? The judge will tell them at the end of the case, how consistent is their testimony? Does it make sense to you from a standpoint of common sense? And what corroborating evidence is there or isn't there? Because you certainly, as a prosecutor, don't want to rest all of your eggs in the basket of people that have credibility issues.
Yeah, and here you've got the corroborating police officers. Again, I keep going back to a lot of what they found. They found these bullets. They found multiple weapons. We've seen a 9mm pistol discussed. We had a long gun out on the witness stand shortly before the lunch break here. You know, as you pointed out, they found these bags of marijuana in I believe it was in the suspect's home of some sort. So, look, that, again, corroborates much of what these witnesses have said. We're going to take a quick break, though, first here. We're talking about the Shaun Harrison case out of Boston, Massachusetts, the case of a school administrator and preacher accused of living a double life and being involved with gangs, drugs, and guns. He's accused of shooting a student in the head. That student he had previously recruited to be a drug dealer. That's the accusation. The trial continues. Lunch break is dragging on a little bit longer than we thought, but we'll be back with live testimony as soon as court resumes. For now, though, this break. Welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. I'm Aaron Keller, and thanks again for those of you joining us on Sirius XM satellite radio. We're talking about the Shaun Harrison case out of Boston, Massachusetts. It's basically an attempted murder case. The specific language of the law there in Massachusetts is armed assault to murder. That's how the law describes it. There are also illegal possession charges for drugs, firearms, and ammunition. The accusation is that the defendant, Shaun Harrison, a school administrator and preacher, was living a double life and was really involved in gangs, drugs, and guns. Those are the accusations. Prosecutors say he ultimately shot a student in the head. That student, Luis Rodriguez, survived the attack, got up on the witness stand, pointed the finger at the defendant, Bob, as they oftentimes do, and said, look, this is the guy, Mr. Harrison, my school administrator, who shot me in the head. Powerful testimony, because the victim on the witness stand said, look, I knew this guy. I know the defendant, and I know he's the guy that did it.
Right, yeah. I mean, there was no question in his mind. He's unequivocating. I don't think that he got hurt in terms of what his answers were. But, you know, Aaron, there's an interesting tactical issue here. You know, a one-shot attempted murder case, believe it or not, I know the folks are going to find this hard to believe, is really hard to prove. I have seen many jurors not come back with attempted murder on a one-shot case. But here they're going for the whole enchilada. They're basically saying, I didn't do it, I'm not guilty, I shouldn't be held responsible for it at all. So it prevents the defense from making that argument that, look, if this was a guy who was really intent on murder and he would have shot more than one time, it would have made sure the job was done. Just an interesting little permutation there tactically.
Well, look, I mean, when you shoot somebody in the head, though, I mean, that's not necessarily a shot that many people would survive from.
Well, you know, a lot of people talk about the fact that these are kids that are involved in some bad activity, drug dealing at a minimum. Maybe there was was an argument, maybe there was a fight. I had a gun for my own protection at my house. As soon as I shot the one round and he was incapacitated, I didn't shoot anymore. These are arguments that do get made and do get bought by juries, maybe even for lesser included offenses as opposed to attempted murder. Or you can do what you're doing here. I'm going for the straight out not guilty on everything.
Well, that would be a tactic. I don't know if it's going to work in this case. It seems to me like pretty clear-cut evidence that this guy was involved in some no-good activities here. But look, we are expecting court to resume relatively soon. Things are starting to pick up in the courtroom. We are not back in yet, but we're going to continue listening to the Kevin Perez cross-examination. He was one of the students who was involved in a fight with the victim, and he said that the defendant was egging things on. And welcome back, everybody. We're listening to previous testimony in the Shaun Harrison case out of Boston, Massachusetts. We are expecting testimony to pick up any minute in that case. The lunch break has been dragging on for about 15 or 20 minutes longer than we anticipated. As soon as testimony picks up, we will bring you right back to that courtroom live. The defendant, Shaun Harrison, is facing basically attempted murder charges in Massachusetts, along with charges that he illegally possessed drugs, firearms, and ammunition. The defendant is a school administrator and preacher who was out in the community saying no to guns, no to drugs, and prosecutors say he was living a double life, that he was really involved with all of the above. He was recruiting students to help him deal drugs, and when there was some kind of a blow-up or an issue with one of those students named Luis Rodriguez, he shot that student in the head. Those are the accusations. The victim survived the attack, pointed the finger at this school administrator and said, yes, this is indeed the guy who shot me in the head. You just heard from one of the other students who was involved in a fight with that victim. He testified that the administrator, the defendant, Shaun Harrison, was egging on the fight, basically encouraging it, and that, yes, there was all sorts of this stuff going on in Mr. Harrison's office. There was weed, there was about a 12-inch long knife, and look, we were talking before, Bob, about some of these witnesses having credibility issues, and here on cross-examination, you heard some of that. Say, hey, look, you were involved in smoking weed back then. You were involved in all this, and he just looked in matter-of-factly said, yes, I was. Admitted it.
Yeah, he's a bad witness for the defense because he's doing the thing that the prosecutor's telling him to do. Admit it, just tell the truth. This way you don't get 15 minutes to an hour of cross-examination because the defense shows that you're lying. Aaron, one of the funniest cases I ever had was a guy who was a gang guy. He was a burglar. He did drugs. And he got up on the witness stand in a murder case and testified. The defense was going at him. He was honest. He admitted to all of his crimes very readily. He was almost affable, almost likable. And when the guy tried to say, the defense lawyer tried to say, well, you're a drug addict and a gang member and so on and so forth, therefore, how can we trust you? And the guy said, I'm all those things, but I'm not a liar. And the jury broke out laughing.
Wow.
And he was a very powerful witness.
Well, look, I mean, exactly. I mean, this is why you get into this whole issue about the dichotomy, the split between conduct and character, and people who do bad acts aren't necessarily dishonest. And the rules of evidence that we all have to follow in court sort of back that up. You know, just because somebody is involved in these things doesn't necessarily mean that they have a character for dishonesty.
You know, when you do defense work and you have an opportunity, unlike a prosecutor, to actually sit down and talk to a lot of people that are in the criminal justice system, and I mean a lot of them, not all of them, because some of them are just really, really bad personages. Especially with the gang guys, you tend to look at them and you're like, wow, respectful, articulate, some of the ones I've represented, especially leaders of gang activity, and you wonder to yourself, had they gone the right way and tried to do the right thing, how successful they could have been.
Exactly. I agree. That's exactly correct. Well, we are going to take a look now as we wait for testimony to pick up in the Shaun Harrison case. We're going to take a look at some of the big crime stories that are making headlines on lawandcrime.com. A brief pause in testimony in the Shaun Harrison attempted murder case out of Boston. We have a drug expert from the Boston Police Department on the stand. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back live in just a moment. Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network, and welcome to those of you who are listening on Sirius XM Satellite Radio. I'm Aaron Keller. I'm here with Bob Bianchi. He's an attorney, former prosecutor. We just went through this whole litany of testimony from William Feeney, who's a Boston Police Department drug expert, about all the various types of marijuana that are sold on the streets of Boston. There was an objection. We're waiting for that sidebar to wrap up. But look, why are we getting into an objection? Is it because they're fighting about the expert knowledge of this particular witness, or what?
It's hard to say. I mean, remember, Aaron, that an expert, of course, has to produce a report prior to trial about where their formulation of their opinions and conclusions come from. It was in the Molly question where the defense lawyer wanted to go forward and make an objection to the court. Maybe he was about to offer an opinion that the defense had not heard of. I really can't say right now without listening to the sidebar conversation.
Yeah, kind of an interesting point for the objection to come up. There was a previous one as to the form of a question. Maybe that's another one here, but it's dragging out an awful long time for a sidebar here. But look, I mean, the jury needs this information to try to make sense of some of what's going on. You did have this witness with this big, huge bag of marijuana up on the witness stand. You know, the thing was the size of like a bed pillow. And he's looking through it saying, oh, yeah, this is a very high grade of marijuana. This has got to be intent to distribute because the average person wouldn't be able to smoke this stuff before it dries out. But look, I mean, if they're going to charge this guy with illegal possession and intent to distribute, then they're going to need to say, okay, exactly as this witness did, that this is more than the average person would be able to consume in a sitting before it goes bad.
Right. So the audience understands before a person can give an opinion, they have to be qualified as an expert. And before you can show that the person possessed drugs with the intent to distribute, the cop has to be able to tell them based on his training and experience as an expert why this is possession with intent, not just possession.
Exactly. So we're waiting for this sidebar to wrap up. It's going on for quite a while here. Well, looks like more testimony is resuming. So let's go back live to the Shaun Harrison case in Boston. Welcome back, everybody. We are back live in the Shaun Harrison attempted murder trial out of Boston, Massachusetts. Another witness on the stand. This is John Biello. He's a forensic scientist, and it looks like he's going to be talking about gunshot residue. I'm going to sign off, though. Bob Bianchi is going to swap chairs here and take the host seat for a little while. I might be back over there a little bit later when court wraps up, but I'll leave you in good hands with Bob Bianchi. Now back live to the testimony.